Happy Tuesday, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Brian Davis and Deni Brian here from Spark Rental for our weekly chat with you about all things real estate investing, landlording, financial independence, passive income, ditching your day job, all good stuff. So as you join us, let us know where you're tuning in from and bring the questions. We keep this totally interactive. This is about you guys. It's not just about us talking at you. So last week, we went over how to tenant-proof your rentals to reduce your repair costs as a landlord. Today, we're talking about 4 alternative ways to get rid of bad tenants other than eviction, which is a question we've been hearing a lot more of in recent months, given the nationwide CDC eviction moratorium. So on that note, Deni, let's jump right in and start talking about the 4 ways, the 4 alternatives other than eviction that landlords can turn to eject some of these violating tenants.
Sure. Just want to say hi, Kristen, and hi, Christina.
Hi, Kristen, and hi, Christina.
Well, you can start clean here and try to non-renew them. So if their lease is coming up for renewal, just send them the required notice if you have one, and just say we're not renewing you. Or if it's a month to month, just give them the required 30, 60, whatever you have in your state or on your lease, and just non-renew them. Now, unfortunately, if it's somebody who doesn't want to leave, that doesn't always work. So then you may have to resort to some other things. But that is a good first defense or offense.
Right. We have a free non-renewal notice on our software, right? Or have we not added that yet? I should have known that before we launched on this.
I know. I will make sure, everyone, and if it's not there, we will make sure it is there.
Yeah, we do offer free tenant notices, both eviction notices and just regular tenant letters through our landlord software. So
just be very careful, because some states like California, and I think New Jersey, they have a little bit of weird things about non-renewals. And then there are other states, if they're senior citizens or other things. So just make sure you know your state laws. Don't just send them out a notice.
Right. So I think in California, they like rebranded non-renewals as like no-cause evictions or something, which is not an eviction; it's the non-renewal of a lease agreement. But yeah, there are a couple states that have like really goofy laws about non-renewals. So
especially places that have rent control. That's another one.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it's worth noting here that with the CDC nationwide eviction moratorium, you can still evict tenants, just not for non-payment of rent, at least for certain tenants that meet certain criteria. But you can still evict tenants for other lease violations.
Right.
So if you have a holdover tenant who has refused to leave after you've non-renewed their lease, that you can evict them for overstaying their lease contract, because as opposed to evicting them for non-payment of rent. So
right.
That's just an important note right now during the pandemic and during this eviction moratorium. You can still file eviction. It just can't be for non-payment of rent, at least for those tenants who meet the criteria. There's an income limit and all those sorts of things. And we do, by the way, we have a full breakdown of those criteria and the current state of the eviction moratorium on our website. So I'll just put a link to that there in the comments.
The other thing you just want to make sure of too is that the eviction moratorium can take a different face in different localities. So just make sure you know your stuff, like you're keeping up on your local laws and whatnot.
Well, that's true, because some local jurisdictions and some states have their own eviction moratoriums separate from the nationwide CDC one. So also a very good point, Deni. All right, so non-renewing the lease is the first option. Deni, what's the second option for saying goodbye to bad tenants who are violating the lease?
Well, if it's that time, raise the rent. If they're a month-to-month tenant, raise it as high as you can go, that within legal limits. I mean, again, these are tactics that you can use, but if you have a tenant that is one of the what do we call them? The really smart ones that
professional tenants.
Professional tenants.
Yeah.
They are they're going to know their way around these tactics. So you're just going to have to be prepared for it. But at least start here. Definitely start here.
Right. So just like with non-renewals, there are some state and local regulations in certain markets around the country. Not that many, but there are some that limit how much landlords can raise the rent by each year. It's usually on a percentage basis, so they'll cap it at like 5% a year or thereabouts. So again, just be aware of your local laws, before raising the rent 20%, right?
Right.
But if you do raise the rent on your tenants, it can be a win-win for you, even if your tenants are kind of difficult, or if they are willing to pay you above market rents, you win. If they decide not to renew, you win. So raising the rent can be a win-win for you as a landlord if the tenants aren't so terrible that you want them out at any cost.
Right.
So number 2 option is raise the rent on your tenants. All right, Deni, what's number 3?
Number 3 has a lot of people either for it or totally against it. And I have used it and it worked. So, I mean, it depends on the situation, and that is cash for keys. And I'll just tell you a little bit about what I had. And it was in the city, and it was at a time, the city's notorious, Philly is a city near me.
Yeah.
And it's notoriously tough. It's one of those tenant-friendly cities, and it's tough. It's tough to evict there. Just to evict regularly, it takes forever. And this was a professional tenant and had a lawyer involved, and Philly has this thing called the federal, I don't know, the Philadelphia Housing Association, and they get involved, and it's just a mess. And she was using it, and she wasn't paying rent. It was like 6 months already. So we finally went in and we offered her cash for keys. And in the long run, what we paid her was less than the ongoing non-paid rent, the ongoing legal fees, and everything else. So there are times this will work if you have to get a spreadsheet out and figure it out. But truthfully, probably more than half, probably 80% of the time, you're not going to get back this back rent that people owe, if that's the case. And or if they're destroying it, you want to get them out anyway because you don't want them destroying it more. So, I mean, a lot of times this could be a good option.
Yeah. So two rules for success if you're contemplating cash for keys. One, you have to give them a very soon and decisive time limit. So something like, you must be out by this Saturday at noon. So that's rule number 1. Rule number 2 for cash for keys is, a condition for them to get it is they must put the unit back. They must hand over the unit in very clean and good condition. The same condition that they were given the property in. Otherwise, the deal's off. So, those are the 2 stipulations that you should make if you're considering cash for keys. Has to be a very soon and sharp time limit, and the unit must be handed back to you sparkling clean and in excellent condition.
Right.
Otherwise,
and you want to go, but like give them this cash, or however you're going to give it to. Don't do this like automated or anything like that. This should be a hand-to-hand off, and you should be looking at the
like
property.
A briefcase full of money, like
you go there like Guido.
Well, and Christina says, make them meet Uncle Tony Capici.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Send
no,
in your
but you
shitty
definitely
want
to. You want to look and make sure all their stuff is out and everything else, because if you are not there and you happen to, automate, send the money through virtual ways, you're not going to know. So make sure that you're handing it to them in person.
Right. You want to go and physically inspect the unit yourself and make sure that they are handing it back over to you in excellent condition.
Right.
All right. Last but not least, number 4, fourth way to get rid of bad tenants other than eviction. What do we have, Deni?
Well, if they're a bad tenant, they're probably doing some bad things. So, so look and see if you can prove some criminal behavior and see if you can get them out that way. Now, you got to be very careful if you're using some of these tactics, this one as well, because, again, you got to be careful you're not harassing them, because then that's going to come back and bite you in the butt. So, but obviously, if you're getting like complaints that there are, wild parties or gambling or something like that, it would be easier to do it. But you don't want to be like, sneaking into their apartments. Be very careful of that. And just, make sure that if you're going to try this, to do it very carefully. But again, it's not that hard to find out look, some of us, all of us, eventually walk across a crooked line. So it's not that hard to find out these things, but be careful how you go about it.
Yeah, so to add on Deni's point there, you do have to give advance written notice to enter the unit. How much notice depends on your state, but it's usually 24 or 48 hours advance written notice before you can enter the unit, unless it's an emergency. So if there is a legitimate emergency that you can use as a pretext to enter the apartment without giving advance written notice, then great, but just be aware of that rule. And so to tie this back all together, some states allow expedited evictions if the tenant is engaging in criminal activity. So
if it's a danger to themselves, or not to somebody else, or the property in some states.
Yeah. So some states do allow expedited evictions if you can prove criminal behavior or that the tenant is dangerous. So this is an option if your tenant is engaging in criminal activity or is dangerous, and you can prove it, because your word alone that this is a bad person is not going to sway a judge. You're going to have to show up in court with some kind of evidence. So something to keep in mind. Deni, any thoughts real quick about what happens if your tenant goes to jail? I mean, do you have to go through the whole eviction process?
You do.
And then what do you do with all their belongings that are left in the property?
Whatever your state mandates. I actually had this happen twice, and I didn't even know until we didn't get the rent, and it happened to be somebody who actually paid rent for a while, and then I finally figured it out, and then his family contacted me. But you can't. It doesn't matter whether they have been picked up and are in jail or anything else. You still have to go through the letter of the law. You still have to wait the certain period of time. You have to evict them unless family members or somebody is there that you can work it out with, or he contacts you from behind bars. And then the other thing is, if they aren't paying rent and you get possession or whatnot, you still have to hold their stuff according to your state laws.
Oh, we lost Deni there. So hopefully she'll be back in a moment. But to Deni's point, there are some states and municipalities that do require landlords to store at their own expense tenants' personal belongings that have been left in the property. It's not fair, it's not right, but it's the law and we all have to follow it. And one final thought there is that if your tenants go to jail, that does not mean that the property has been considered legally abandoned. It doesn't. So to her point, you still have to file eviction and go through that process, although it's sometimes an expedited eviction process. And Deni has rejoined us, so welcome back. So to recap, the 4 alternatives to eviction to get rid of bad tenants. 1, you can non-renew their lease if it's up for renewal or if they're on a month-to-month lease. 2, you can raise the rent above market rates. Again, if their lease is up for renewal or if they're on a month-to-month lease. Number 3, you can offer cash for keys. But if you do that, make sure that you put a very short time limit on it, and you must make sure that they deliver the unit back to you sparkling clean and in the same condition in which they moved in. And number 4, if you can prove criminal behavior, or if you can prove that the tenant is a danger to the neighbors or someone else in the vicinity, then sometimes you can have an expedited eviction, and evictions are still allowed even during the moratorium for criminal behavior or other lease violations beside non-payment of rent. We've got a comment here. Sean Hundley, it says, hey there, I'm Sean from Logan'sville, Georgia. Always open to networking and possible JV partnerships. So this is the place for networking. And check out our Facebook group, the Landlords and Property Managers Hub as well. All right, Deni, anything else you want to add before we wrap this up and call it an episode?
No, just sorry I pooped out there for a minute, but no, just again, make sure that all of these tactics that you're using is within the limits of law, because a landlord getting in trouble for some of these things can be worse than if you just waited it out with the tenant.
Right. And one other thought, your lease should have an explicit clause in it that makes it a violation for any criminal activity to happen
Yes.
in or around the leased premises. So your lease agreement must have that clause, or should have that clause. Ours does. We have state-specific leases for every single state, which I added a link to. But whatever lease you use, just make sure that it has an explicit clause banning all criminal activity anywhere near the leased premises, not just indoors or inside the unit, but around the entire property.
Right.
All right, on that note, we're gonna call it a day. So as always, let us know what you'd like to hear about next week. This is all about you guys. Actually, no, we have a guest coming on next week. We've got Rick Orford from the Financially Independent Millennial coming on next week to talk about reaching financial independence young. But broader point, let us know what topics you want us to cover, because we do listen. And this topic today actually was Tim Dooley's idea. It was his question that he asked. So we wanted to talk it over, because this is something we hear a lot from landlords right now: how to get rid of bad tenants despite the eviction moratorium.
And
so
thanks,
let us know what you want to hear about. Yeah, and we will see you next Tuesday, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. And have a great week, you guys.
See you later.